Okay, welcome to GothCast, episode 11.
Yeah, we've officially put the nail in the coffin, so to speak. For those of you who don't know, most podcasts stop at 10 episodes. That's usually the rate of failure for podcasts. And so today we are officially putting that to rest.
Cool. And of course, it's with one of my... Actually, this is my favorite band of all time. So we're going to be talking about Typo Negative.
Yes, we are.
So this band, I feel, is really underrated in a lot of ways. And I think it's kind of an identity crisis of where a lot of people don't know where to put them musically.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Part of it is because they're so embraced by the metal community that I feel like early on they got that labeling. And so when they branched out and really started to explore new sounds and really demonstrated that they were capable of more gothic material, that people still kind of just pictured them as a metal band.
Yeah, that's kind of the frustrating thing. A lot of people will group this band into like doom metal or gothic metal or alternative metal or...
Yeah, Wikipedia's official is gothic metal.
One of the things that's kind of frustrating about that, at least I can see, is this is one of those bands that sounds so unique.
Yeah.
And there's really no band that sounds exactly like Typo Negative.
Oh, definitely not.
Definitely people have tried to do their sound, you know, like especially after they came out. There's definitely a lot of bands I know of, a lot of foreign bands that will try to sound like them, but they just don't quite have the same thing. If this band feels very natural in their sound, and their sound is extremely unique.
Oh, definitely. I would definitely agree with that. It's funny, the gothic vocal sound is like a baritone kind of voice.
Yeah.
Peter Steele goes far beyond baritone. He is a bass, clear and simple.
Yeah.
It's not just the instrument he plays, it's the instrument he sings.
Yeah, this band... We'll talk about a lot of their distinct music choices on their albums, but for those of you who don't know, Typo Negative is fronted by Peter Steele, his guitar player Kenny Hickey, Josh Silver on keyboards. Also Peter Steele plays bass.
Yeah.
And then,
For those of you who don't know.
Yeah. And then for most of their time, it was Johnny Kelly on drums, but...
He was replaced.
Sal Albercasco was their first drummer, and then Johnny Kelly is their second drummer.
Oh, yeah.
And Johnny Kelly was the drummer through their demise. So, obviously, if you're not familiar with Typo Negative, the band before Typo Negative was actually a band called Carnivore.
Yep. Kind of thrash metal, hardcore metal band.
Exactly. And it's not my favorite band, obviously. I'm not super into that sound. It's like punk mixed with metal. I forget what they call it. It's like hardcore metal or something.
Officially, they're labeled as thrash, but they are more of a hardcore metal band.
Yeah, so they actually had a pretty decent following. In fact, their last album, I think it's Retaliation, it's actually pretty good, but that's mostly because I think it kind of sounds like Slow, Deep, and Hard.
Yeah.
But just more aggressive.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Carnivore, kind of have to agree with you on that. Not my favorite band. I don't think that they're a terrible band by any means, but I feel like they just kind of pale in comparison to Typo Negative.
I think it's just because of musical choices, honestly. They're not quite as adventurous. They definitely, especially on Retaliation, they definitely try some different things, but Typo Negative is just such like, hey, let's try a whole bunch of different things.
And plus Typo Negative's ridiculous sense of humor is just so great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Carnivore has that too. Like
it does, but not to the same extent.
Yeah, it's true. Well, also, just throwing another piece of trivia, there is another band that they were in. I think it was Josh Silver, the keyboardist, and Peter Steele. It was a band called Fallout. Yeah. And they played...
I saw that one too.
Kind of like rock and roll, kind of like, it's really hard to explain music. I recommend giving it a look if you're kind of just into some weird, odd kind of songs. The only two that I've ever heard are Batteries Not Included and I think Rock Hard or something. I think that's the song titles.
It's like an Andrew WK tribute or something.
Something like that. But it's pretty good. I just like Peter Steele's voice. So 1989, Carnivore had broken up, and Peter Steele and all the rest of the members of Typo Negative go on and form Typo Negative. So it's 1989, so it's technically still an 80s band.
They're not called Typo Negative at this point.
Yeah, so they called Sub-Zero when they initially started. And so they had the Typo Negative logo, or Sub-Zero logo, which is a circle and a negative symbol. And they had all this tattooed on them. And that's, the Typo Negative logo that we know today. Turns out there was another band called Sub-Zero. And so... because they didn't want to change the logo, they kept the tattoo and changed the name to something that would match the tattoo.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you got it tattooed on you at that point, I mean, I'd try and make it work too.
Yep, exactly. All right, so it was 1989. Band gets together, they start writing new material, and actually, Peter Steele says that actually from their first album, a lot of it was kind of like leftover sort of riffs and things and stuff they were kind of working on for Carnivore.
Well, it kind of, that's what it reminds me of a little bit.
Yeah. So 2 years after they form, in 1991, out comes an album, Slow, Deep, and Hard.
Yep. And there's nothing slow about this album.
Well, there is. It is kind of like...
No, it was just being a little punny there with you.
Oh, okay.
In that it's a very, very heavy-hitting album.
It is. Like, this album is a very, very unique one. In fact, it's funny because it's probably, for Type O Negative, a lot of people listen to, you know, some of the more controversial songs, you know, the Coping Unsuccessfully with the Natural Beauty of Infidelity, you know, the I Know You're Fucking Someone Else.
Yep.
And a lot of people know that song because, like, oh, you know, sex and stuff like Today.
Yeah. Well, this is the album. Well, every album.
Yeah.
Or a lot of their albums, I should say. But starting with this album, we kind of have this image of Type O Negative being this very tongue-in-cheek band who inserts a lot of very blatant sexual references into their songs, very violent references that are all done very humorously. In fact, their album art is literally a picture of a penis going into a vagina that they cut out of a porno magazine and just kind of grained it out and turned it green.
They finally figure out where that came from? Was it porno magazine? Yeah. Oh, really? I thought they said it was Peter Steele's penis.
No, it's porno magazine.
Wow. New information to me.
Yep.
Yeah, this album was pretty controversial when it came out.
Oh, and super controversial.
They do want to say something about society. They do want to comment on these things.
Oh, they definitely have a message. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of that gets lost in translation because people get caught up so much in the ridiculousness of some of these songs.
Yeah, or they just read like the lyrics that don't mention. It's just like talking about social parasites, and
they take it for face value when really a lot of these things are actually commenting on the way things are.
Yeah, you know, it's commentary on like welfare and all this kind of stuff and drug users and a lot of things like that. And I think people just take it so seriously that it kind of they ran into a lot of issues. I think they were banned from playing in Holland or something.
Yeah, like, well, there was a period of time where they were being called like Nazis and being labeled as, you know, like fascists and stuff.
And Josh Silver is in the band, so he's definitely Jewish. So
we'll get to more of that with.
Yeah, they definitely do something in response.
They do
to
something as a response to that whole backlash.
Yeah, but this album, Peter Steele was interviewed on Howard Stern about this album. So he says, I'm trying to do my best Howard Stern impression. So Peter, so the first album's all about you wanting to kill your girlfriend, then kill yourself. You have always had thoughts about killing yourself, and you think that Kurt Cobain was the greatest idol because he had the balls to do it. And then Peter Steele goes, yeah, more or less.
Yeah, that's kind of how, that's the dynamic of a Peter Steele interview.
Yeah. Yeah, this album is extremely dark. It is very humorous. It is, if you get into it. Like the humorous album is very hard to kind of pull out of it at first because it feels, if you're used to listening to so much like metal, or this album is so unique in that it blends that kind of tongue-in-cheek, like, I fucking hate you so much, like kind of stuff, but it's done in a very hilarious way. Musically, I would say that if you're really familiar with like their top hits, you know, like Black Number One or Love You to Death, thing like that, it will probably surprise you what this album sounds like. I feel like today a lot of people are familiarizing themselves with this album, which is strange.
Because this is the most printed album right now.
Yeah, right now. I mean, I run into Slow, Deep, and Hard everywhere. Yep. But I never run
funny
into...
thing to say.
I don't run into October Rust or Bloody Kisses or...
Right?
And definitely not anything like After a World Coming Down.
Yeah.
So this album seems to be gaining some kind of popularity. You know, we talk all the time about how first albums somehow over the years gain more traction than like later albums.
Definitely.
This is definitely one of those cases where I feel like their first album, which probably a lot of people wouldn't have listened to back then, because we're used to a lot more aggressive music in today's world, or we're used to like kind of sexual related music. People are really intrigued by it.
Yeah.
That they're getting into this album a lot more.
No, I could definitely see that. And this album, it does a lot of things well. So it really brings to the forefront this blend of humor and seriousness in a way that allows the band to commentate on the state of society without like being too pretentious, really. And the songs themselves are actually well written. They're very well structured. Mm-hmm. There's lots of musical ideas happening on this album, a lot of experimentation. But I'm just going to come out and say it because I know this is the reason that you and I disagree about this album. I don't like the way the original mixing was done for this album.
I like it. I really do. Pretty much the guitar, I can see why why you have an issue with it. Pretty much the guitar has...
The drums too, like they're so tinny on.
Yeah, I definitely think that's because they're coming from like a metal background.
Yeah,
that they have that sort of drum sound because it really is like a heavy metal drum sound. It's very snappy, kind of thing.
That wasn't exactly how I would have described it. Yeah. I almost like it reminded me of hardcore punk. Like that's the way it was mixed to me. Like
yeah, I like the way the original is mixed, but that's the album I listened to. So
yeah, but we had this discussion off mic how there's actually a remaster. And I actually really enjoy the remaster a lot.
I was actually pretty blown away. I remember when Peter Steele died, I went out and bought the remastered version because I was kind of putting off. I was like, okay, I'll just go buy it to support him. And I was really surprised because it actually has a completely different sound than the original mix of it. And it's actually pretty full.
No, it's way fuller. And that's what, for me personally, the remastered version of the album is the better album for me.
Okay.
Because the guitars... for my taste, are mixed properly. Like there's actual mid-range in there. The drums have some depth to them. They're not like super tinny.
Yeah.
The vocals are mixed way better. I remember listening to the album the first time through, and all I could think about was like, why does his voice sound like it's coming out of a tin can? And on the remaster, you don't have that. Like there's depth, there's reverb, there's all these things that are missing in the original mix that really, for me, detracted from the album, at least sonically.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention about Typo Negative is actually how I got into this band. And so the way I got into Typo Negative was my uncle had given me a whole bunch of CDs. He's just like, here you go. Like a whole bunch of like Van Halen and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the albums in there, which I thought was really weird, was this band called Typo Negative, right?
Yeah.
And I had forgotten where I'd heard of them, like something where they was talking about Peter Steele's Playboy thing or something, which we'll get to.
Yep.
But I had only heard this band in passing, and I heard like the one album they had on there was October Rust, right?
Yep.
And so I was like, October Rust, and I listened to it. I was so blown away by it, right?
Yeah. And
so I got super into Typo Negative. This was when I was in high school, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this band is so amazing. And it's before I realized that like pretty much every album from them is pretty drastically different.
Yeah.
And so I went back. I was like, I gotta try and find all their stuff. This is back before. This is where we needed to buy CDs and stuff. You couldn't go and like stream or just whatever your preferred way of.
We're gonna be honest. Most of these people are torrenting.
Yeah, I stream now. It's like most of the time. I still buy music though. I mean, we buy a lot of records.
Yeah, I buy music.
Yeah.
I can't justify paying for a digital copy of something.
Okay. So yeah, I know I like the art, but I forget how I got a hold of the first album. I forget. I think I had to go like Best Buy or something like that and try and find a copy, but they never had one, so you had to like request it. Remember when you do that? Yep. Whenever you couldn't find it, you're like, okay, can you put this in your store so then I could buy it? So you could do that and like order it, and I'm pretty sure I did that with their first album. I was like,
back when it was hard to find things on Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. This is before I think you could even really order stuff feasibly from like a lot of stuff from Amazon. I think it was when Amazon was still books mostly.
It was like books and toys and weird things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I got a copy of Slow Deep and Hard. It took me forever to get it, and I was just blown away by this album because it didn't sound anything like October Rust, and we're gonna get to October Rust and why that album is amazing. But this really shocked me, like because it doesn't sound anything like the band that just a few albums later is gonna sound
not at
like.
All.
And it's so
it's 2 albums later.
Aggressive. Yeah, it's so aggressive. And I just really like it. It feels so genuine. This band, on every album, it doesn't feel forced. And that's what I love.
And that's why I would never, ever tell anyone not to listen to this album. I would never tell anyone this is a bad album. I don't particularly like the way it was mixed. And I think in a weird way, for me, my Typo experience is like almost like the reverse of yours because I heard Slow Deep and Hard first and was almost turned off by them for a long time. Because I'll be honest with you, like before we did this podcast, like I was not really that into Typo Negative. I never gave them that much of a chance because I'd heard them before, but I'd really kind of just heard stuff off of Slow Deep and Hard because that's what's in circulation now.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, great, another hardcore punk metal band thing, and I kind of just glanced over it quickly. And then you listen to this album, and you're like, okay, maybe it's not a perfect album, but there's so many interesting ideas on there, and so many things that they do with humor and song titling that many other bands would never venture to do. And then I got to their later albums, and I was like, oh my God, I've been missing all this stuff all this time because I was willing to write them off over one album.
Yeah. One thing I want to note is when we talk about Peter Steele's voice being basically completely bass.
Yeah.
And on this album, he pretty much just yells. And he said that before. He's like, I didn't sing on the first albums. I just yelled.
Yeah. There's an interview with them where he's like, I didn't know how to sing. He's like, I just knew how to yell. And he's like, by the time we got to Bloody Kisses, he's like, well, I thought maybe I should try and figure out how to sing.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that gives them a very unique sound is other than implementing keyboards, and I think they do it very well.
Yeah.
Like it actually just makes it a very full sound.
Oh, it does.
Maybe people don't know this, and if you don't play guitar, then this might not make sense to you, or like play an instrument. But they actually tune down to B, so it's a full B. So it's like, how many steps are there? Like 3 full steps down.
No, they do 2.5 steps down.
2.5, yeah. So
it's a crazy low tuning, which means they have to be playing with ridiculous sized strings.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what gives this band a really unique sound. And anybody who's ever tried to learn some type of native songs, you're like, whoa, I can't even make this sound right because I need to completely set up my guitar differently in order to be able to even...
You need to go out and buy 12-gauge strings and reset up your guitar 2.5 steps down.
Exactly. So that gives it a totally unique sound because, to be honest, I mean, I'm sure a lot of their songs would sound very similar to a lot of bands, at least musically, like instrumentally, if they weren't in that tuning. But because they are, a lot of these riffs, they sound so brand new. I mean, even Gravitational Constant, right?
Yeah.
You know, just...
They're definitely one of the first bands that started using that tuning, because there's lots of bands now that use that tuning. Oh, absolutely. And before them, we'd seen a lot of, like Drop C. Mm-hmm. You see that one a lot. And that was probably like as heavy as people went as far as detuning guitars was concerned. But this album was really detuning guitars.
Yeah. One of the things I hear a lot of people complain about with this album in particular is the sort of droning, dirging material at times.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, one of the songs I love on this album is Der Untermensch, right?
Yep.
A lot of people feel at the beginning just drags.
Yeah.
You know, just just like a lot of like chugging chords and a lot of things like that where it's just repeating itself again and again.
Yeah.
And then you get to a part that's like really good about 4.5 minutes in, and that's where a lot of people will like to listen to that. And you know, I can't blame people for that kind of thing, but it is something that Typo Negative is pretty known for, is having these really long parts and then having them a very different one switch partway through the song, or and then going maybe back to it.
No, I definitely know what you're saying. I will say, though, in defense of people who say that, I think they do a better job of doing songs like that on later albums than this one.
I agree.
But this is a very good first attempt at doing something like that. Mm-hmm. So I can't like really say like, oh, no, this album doesn't make any sense. They're going in so many different directions. It's like, this is genius. Like, they're combining all these like weird things that wouldn't normally fit together. Yeah. And Peter Steele even comments on how like unintentional it was. He just like, he didn't know how to string songs together, so he just throw chunks of songs into like the mix. And
and that's really what I appreciate about this. And yeah, like you said, we're gonna see it done a lot better as time goes on. As far as songs that I love from this album, I pretty much love every song on this album. And there are some pretty interesting ones, I'll say that. Like I said, Unsuccessfully Coping with the Beauty of Infidelity is the opening track. It's great.
Oh, that's a great song.
Der Untermensch, of course. Then you have Gravitational Constant, which would go on to be, they call it Gravity later.
Yeah.
And then just, you know, Zero Tolerance. And pretty much everything on this album I enjoy. There is, of course, the misinterpretation of silence and its consequences.
Okay, I include that technically in my favorite songs just because of how ridiculous and awesome that is on the album.
So it's basically, for those of you who are not familiar with that song, I use that in air quotes, the misinterpretation of silence and its consequences is basically just a minute of nothing.
Yeah.
And that's it. Even if you like enhance it or amplify it 500,000 times, I don't think there's any sound on it. So.
Yeah. But for those of you who also don't know, it's also a play on a whole music theory idea that dead space in a song is just as important as notes that are being played. And so technically, when you notate music, nothing is ever written as silence. It's considered a break in the measure. There's no such thing as silence in music. And so the reference is the misinterpretation of silence is someone hears a song, they're like, oh, why does the song go silent? It's not silent. It's a break.
I love that. Yeah, so we're going to see this kind of sound move farther and farther away. I think this album is definitely gaining a lot more popularity as time goes on. It was definitely not known when I had gotten in the band. Like, a lot of people were just only familiar with Bloody Kisses and like October Rust and maybe like World Coming Down at the time, like barely.
Yep.
So this album is definitely getting a lot of traction. It feels like a lot more people are listening to these songs because they're like aggressive, and it kind of, people are just more accepting of this kind of sound today than they would have been. I mean, this would have been one of the most abrasive things you would have ever heard back then, like in terms of just flat out saying these things. Like,
yeah, but now this is like nothing as far as like controversy goes.
Exactly. So Slow Deep and Hard, I fully recommend this one if you're into kind of like harder music, like you're into like more punk kind of metal sound.
Yeah,
it's not what you're gonna expect from Type of Negative if you're only familiar with like Bloody Kisses or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely not.
But I think it does do a better job than albums like when we talk about Susie and the Banshees of Scream, or when we're talking about Three Imaginary Boys by The Cure. And that seems like a lot of goth bands have very different like first albums.
Yeah.
But the first album relating to their music in the future and actually being of merit. Like, I think that this album is just as good as their later albums, even though it does something completely different, which is where I can't say for some of the other bands that we've done, where their first album was really more like a kind of stepping stone, but you're like, okay, it's gonna get better.
Yeah, I have so many mixed feelings about this album. Like, I love it and I hate it and I love it more. For me, I completely agree with you. I think this album has just as much merit as anything else they've released because of its mainstay in popularity and because of what they did in terms of originality.
Yeah.
And it isn't a throwaway album. It's not... Like, those first couple Susie and the Banshee records are really hard to listen to. And while I admit that this album is pretty abrasive, there's a lot of like humor and things in there that like keep you pulled into it.
Yeah.
And things that keep you wanting to listen to this album. And so what I will say is that if you're like a hardcore, like traditional goth, you may not like this album.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. If you're a little more open-minded, you're interested in some other genres, then I would definitely recommend you check it out. At least, you know, I think it deserves listening to.
Yeah, me too. This is our news segment for this episode.
All right, for those of you who don't know, you musicians out there probably do. There is a company called Coffin Cases that build cases for guitars, basses, various instruments that are shaped like coffins, run by a man named Johnny Coffin. And 2016 is going to be their anniversary. And to celebrate that, they are releasing, because he also does clothing lines periodically. Yeah. He's going to be doing a vampire clothing line.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And so there's actually not a lot of vampire clothing out there, unfortunately. You know, there's a couple of good shirts, but that's really it.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that he's releasing a line of clothing that's going to feature her.
Yeah.
Because so often you just see Elvira stuff and you don't see Vampira.
Yeah.
It's nice to see some homage to where it came from.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I really am excited for that. That's actually pretty cool. I hope they actually do something for like men's that would be interesting. I'm not holding my breath on it, of course. Most of the stuff, you know, they don't really focus on that particular market.
I think that he does in particular, just because he's like, a lot of people who buy from his company are men because they're musicians buying guitar cases and stuff. So I kind of have some faith in that there'll be a balance between men and women's clothing.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. I think he should plan on 9 different articles of clothing.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's pretty punny of you.
Yeah. Okay, so our next piece of news, of course, is some David Bowie news, because you hear us ramble about David Bowie randomly every once in a while. So,
with good reason.
Yeah. So David Bowie's going to come out with a new album next year, supposedly, called Black Star.
Yeah, it sounds kind of gothy.
Yeah, so there was a teaser for this released, I think it was last week, I want to say. But then, as of recording this episode, it was actually released today, was the 10-minute music video teaser promotional thing for it.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty awesome, actually. And yeah, it really does remind me of some of like his more like 90s material.
Yeah.
Which I've always said, and nobody believes me, that his 90s material is actually pretty underrated. Like,
some of it is really good. There's a lot of it that I can't like listen to, but there are some gems in there. And unfortunately, they're overlooked all the time.
Yeah. So I do like what he's doing. When it comes out, we might just do like a quick review on it or anything.
Well, I have a lot of hope because The Next Day was such a good album that David Bowie has songwriting chops, man.
Oh yeah.
And if anybody can, release another solid piece of work, I trust David Bowie too.
The best and worst thing about David Bowie is that you never know what to expect, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, he did his album is The Next Day, and then he did the single release for Sue, or In a Season of Crime, and I love that song, but a lot of people did not like it. And then Black Star, of course, is something totally different than all that. So he keeps us on our toes.
He definitely does that.
So yeah, looking forward to that one. It's going to be called Black Star, or I think that's what people are calling it, Black Star, because like the actual album thing is like a whole bunch of weird shaped stars. It's really interesting. So, but yeah, if you actually want to see something that's pretty cool and it's new and a little bit different than, say, I don't know what's popular right now.
Grimes.
Yep. Check out this video. It's pretty cool. Pretty high budget, and yeah, a lot of really cool imagery.
Yep.
So
I completely agree.
Yeah. So that's our news for this week. New David Bowie and Vampire clothing line.
Yep.
So let's get back to Type O Negative.
All right.
All right. So now we're on to the origin of the Feces.
Yes. Again, with their beautiful puns.
This is really the album where they
embrace the humor wholeheartedly.
Well, I feel like this album is really a response to the first album.
Yeah.
So this is a fake live album.
Yep.
In which they re-record a lot of the songs from their first album and then kind of slimmed down most of it.
Yeah.
And then they put in like a fake live audience. They put in like a fake bomb threat, and like people are like yelling like they hate him and all this kind of stuff. And it was a lot of the stuff that they had encountered when they were touring for their first album because it was so controversial. So the whole bomb threats and people hating them and everything, they thought they put in as a joke on this one. And this, I mean, like just even saying that, it's a very weird album.
It is. But okay, so for me, with my typo fandom,
yeah,
I like this album more than the last album.
Yeah.
For me, it's because it works on a few different levels. For one, there's way more humor factor, way more like wittiness involved in this album than the last album. It's, like a response to the last album, like you said. It's a fake live album. The album art itself is literally Peter Steele pulling his freaking ass cheeks apart.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah,
that is.
So Peter Steele pulls his ass cheeks apart, and that's the album cover. You get to see his butthole.
Yeah, and there is a censored version of it, which is like skeletons. Yeah, that's the one I grew up with.
I was exposed to the butthole.
Yeah, I got it.
I also like the rearranging of the songs that are from the last album.
Absolutely. Like this album is obviously very much more lighthearted than Slow Deep and Hard was. Like Slow Deep and Hard, while it is humorous in what it's trying to, it's laden with humor in it. I mean, the seriousness of like self-harm and suicide and stuff, that is very serious for Peter Steele on that album. I mean, the last lyrics of Slow Deep and Hard on Gravitational Constant are suicide is self-expression.
Yep.
And he really felt that way.
Yeah.
And but this one, they just put that all kind of aside for a more gloomier type of humor, almost in getting sort of into the vein of like horror movie, spook show kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think one of the perfect examples of that is they cover Hey Joe.
Yep, except it's not called Hey Joe.
Yeah, it's called Hey Pete. And instead of being like, oh, I saw you with your gun, he's like, hey, Peter, we're going with that axe in your hand, you know?
Yep.
And so there's definitely this sort of like referencing like horror movies.
By the way, great cover.
Oh, it's a great cover. It's absolutely awesome.
That's one thing that I have to say that they do so well time and time again is their covers of songs are great on any of their albums.
That's one of the things is this is a band where whenever they cover bands, I almost love their covers more most of the time.
Yeah,
but I'm always surprised that they even make them into covers. So I'm like, man, that just could have been a really like good song, you know?
Yeah.
Like if they just rewritten. I mean, honestly, because on this album too, they also have a cover of "Paranoid" by Black Sabbath, and with that one, it doesn't even sound like it at all.
No, not at all.
And so even Hey Peter.
But that's what I appreciate about covers. And okay, I know you're not the biggest fan of covers.
Not really.
But I like when a band does a good cover, like a good tribute to a band. And when I say that, I don't mean a faithful reproduction of the song, because what's the point of that? That's meaningless. But to me, this is what a good cover is. This is a song that you like, Paranoid or, you know, Hey Pete. The chorus is much more reminiscent of Hey Joe than, you know, the Paranoid cover is. But they're still like so different that I can enjoy these songs that I've heard before in a new way. And for me, that's fun. And that shows me like their heritage and where they come from and what they appreciate. And the fact that they respect a band enough not to just blatantly rip off their song, but to do something with it, to make it art again.
Yeah. The sound on this album is probably the thing that I battle with all the time. I know.
On this one,
right? So for Slow, Deep, and Hard, I do like that sort of like really, even the original one looks pretty muddled, but especially with the remaster, it's way more up front in your face.
They're completely different things. You can't.
But with the Origin of Feces, I've never been a fan of the whole like reverby live thing, you know, like where it's...
Okay, I could get why you don't like that.
Yeah. So... and one of the things that made me really realize that is if you ever listen to The Least Worst of Typo Negative, their greatest hits album, they have a version of Hey Pete on there that has sans reverb and all that stuff, like all minus all the live album stuff. And I always listen to that version because I just like it the way it sounds. I don't like it with all that stuff coated on top of it and like the fake chatter and all that.
Yeah.
That's really the only thing I dislike about this album because I've heard one of the songs without it.
Yeah.
I like the arrangements a lot more. You know, they also changed the song titles. Like instead of Gravitational Constant, they changed it to Gravity. They add the Are You Afraid intro, which they pretty much did forever after that. They always added the Are You Afraid intro to the beginning of Gravity.
Yep.
And then, of course, I know you're effing someone else. They just changed the song title to that in this album instead of being Unsuccessfully Coping with the Beauty of Infidelity, because I'm pretty sure that's probably what everybody just called it. That's probably why they just changed it to that.
Yeah. I really like this album a lot.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. In fact, I usually will put this one on my car more than I will put Slow, Deep, and Hard on. Although it's weird. I think that I prefer Slow, Deep, and Hard as an album, but this one is just an easier listen. Which is weird to say that because this album is still a pretty weird album.
I don't know. That is a weird thing to say. I mean, you could potentially make that argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. They're both not what I would consider easy listens. Or I should say neither of them are what I would consider easy listens. But, you know what? I'll give you that. It's an easier listen.
Okay.
I kind of I see where you're going with that. Like, it is easier to listen to, but I kind of think that's why it's a better album for me.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's lots of great stuff on Slow, Deep, and Hard, but it really, as far as Typo Negative material goes, that's like as brash as it gets.
Yeah, it is weird, just because it is basically the first album redone.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much...
With a few extra songs.
Yeah, with a few covers, basically, and a few intros, right? It is weird. It's so confusing to somebody who's not like familiar with this stuff, right?
Yeah, so we have like 3 versions of the first album now.
Yeah, basically. Like Zero Tolerance is like Kill You Tonight, and like Pain is Prelude to Agony, and like all this stuff. And it's just so strange. But I do really like this album. It's a very fun album.
That's what I enjoy about it. Like, I had a lot more fun listening to this, like, in my private time than I do listening to Slow, Deep, and Hard.
Yeah, I'm just so conflicted because these are very different.
Yeah.
Like, Slow, Deep, and Hard, like I said, it is humorous, it's tongue-in-cheek, but it is also serious in a way. So I feel like some of that spirit of those original songs are gone on this one.
I would agree with you on that. They get a little more lighthearted on this album, but I think that's I mean, it's supposed to. I mean, it's a fake live album.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. I'm just saying that, like, if you're first getting into these songs, and you want like the full experience of them, I would almost say listen to Slow Deep and Hard. Like, if you're into kind of like mopier or more like nihilistic music, whereas if you're into like kind of just better songwriting, then listen to this one because it definitely is snappier.
That is kind of what it comes down to, and that's I think where you and I always venture on our our reviews of the albums. Is it like, for me, it's really hard for me to sell an album like if I can't buy into the songwriting. And this songwriting on this album is so much better than the last one.
Yeah, it's true.
But they're both great albums, and yeah, I feel just as conflicted as you do.
Right, exactly. So, yep, that's the origin of the Feces. Okay, so it's the big one.
Yep.
This is the one that most people are familiar with. Is Bloody Kisses.
Yep. This is the album that puts them into mainstream success.
Yeah, so 1993. Man, it's a crazy thing, man.
Right?
No one's thing. So it's just
the year I was born, man.
1991, not the year I was born, but so it's...
I know it's not the year you were born, but...
so 1991, so Slow, Deep, and Hard. Then just 2 years later, have an album that doesn't even resemble the same band.
Yep.
I mean, it does in a way, but not really in terms of like songwriting. So this was the big one, right? This is the one that went platinum. This is the one that has all the videos everybody knows. It's the one...
It's the most internationally successful album they've ever released.
So a lot of things I want to talk about with this album, but first off, let's just talk about the hits. Let's just talk about the biggest thing that everybody wants us to get to right away. So let's just talk about Black Number One, Christian Woman. And so
both great songs.
Yeah. So Black Number One, this is the single that a lot of girls like to dance to. This is the one that like a lot of people know. This is references to Lily Munster and clove cigarettes and dyeing your hair and
all the gothic staples that
exactly. Like the love in you was like love in the dead.
This is the album where we first hear Peter Steele's bass voice come out. Like his super, like it does sometimes cross over into the baritone range, but it does have a lot of bass range in it too. But for me, this album blew me away because having heard these albums in chronological order, I hear this album and I'm like, holy crap, this album is so good. Like, where did this come from? Like the other stuff was already good, but I was like, this just took them to a whole nother plateau. Yeah, it totally goes to a different place. And that's what I like about this album. It is something that's very confusing. And I'm glad they took the jump because it seems like, maybe they were struggling or they weren't getting as known based on what they were releasing. Yeah. And they really show off their songwriting chops on this one. No, they really do. And I don't think that they sacrifice any things that made them great on the last albums at all either. So to me, this is growth. This isn't a compromise. Yeah. I definitely like but this one, there's a lot of variation in the songs. And that was something that was definitely lacking from the first two releases. So I also like there's way more emphasis on like the keyboards for parts and just like the slower melodies. They get way better at doing the whole long song thing on this Absolutely. Album. Yeah. And this is the one where they basically cement that into it where you're like, okay, these can be done really well. Yeah. And like, I don't want to skip any part of the song or anything. Black Number One is 11 minutes long. Yeah. That's like the regular version. And it's a single. Yeah. And then for the video, they slimmed down like 4.5 minutes. And Christian Woman is long too. Yeah, it's about 9 minutes long. Yeah. And it has multiple parts, and all the parts are really good. And I really like that. The other single off the album is Summer Breeze. That's the shortest song. That's the one I like the least. Yeah, I've never been the biggest fan of Summer Breeze. Yeah. Was it the Seals and Crofts song cover? Okay. But then you have a lot of songs that I almost feel like people just so associate with Typo Negative and their sound. So like Too Late Frozen, We Hate Everyone. Yep. Black Number One, Christian Woman, Even Kill All the White People. Yeah, definitely. Blood and Fire. Like these are songs where people are like, oh yeah, that's the Typo Negative sound. Even if on later albums they don't necessarily mimic that to a T, people are like, that's what Typo Negative sounds like. Yeah. And this is really the album that people just are like, yeah, that's Typo Negative sound. Yeah, it cements the idea of what Typo Negative is for people. Like it debuts Peter Steele's new singing style. It debuts the fact that they've moved more into a openly gothic kind of sound. Yeah. while still maintaining just as much heaviness and dark humor. And
yeah. I think the humor is less subtle. By less subtle, I mean that it's not as present on this one. Like, it seems almost like
more subtle?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, less subtle that's less existent.
Yeah.
But this one is just not as quite as funny. It seems like they took a lot more seriously. Like,
no, it's definitely not as... It's not like the album's not a big joke.
Yeah.
And for me, while I really like their sense of humor, and I like that they always put these little things in their albums that are just ridiculous and for fun, I like that they were able to step outside their comfort zone and be like, okay, we're going to make an album that's serious. We're going to make an album that's not just complete satire.
Yeah.
We're going to do an album that's a complete serious album, but still be funny, still display technical capability, advanced songwriting skills,
Yeah. And that's definitely present here. And I'm going to point out some songs where it actually is humorous still.
Yep.
Of course, Kill All the White People. So they were
Machine Screw.
Yeah, Machine. Well, okay, so I'll actually talk about that. So in this one, there's a lot of soundscape kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now they had that with their first albums. They had like the buzzsaw and everything.
Yeah.
Like that, and kind of like just the doomy sound effects. But you have songs like Machine Screw, Fray Away, Come Out and Play, Dark Side of the Womb, and what's the 30 IF?
Dark Side of the Womb. You gotta love that.
Yeah. So you have these kind of like just all they are is just soundscapes, and it's just interspersed between the album. Does it help the effect? I'll leave that up to you, honestly. I mean, yes and no for me. I've never been the hugest fan of just having soundscape tracks like before, like to introduce songs. It's okay for me.
I don't know. I think it adds to the album because, well, at least with Machine Screw, like a lot of that stuff is like it's funny.
Yeah.
Like, and I like that there's these. It's almost like you're watching a movie, and you have all this tension building, and then there's this little comedic break to just kind of pull away from the tension just for a second.
Yeah.
And then you go back into the tension, and just another little break, just so it's not constantly, hitting at you all the time. And for me, the soundscapes are fun. Like, I don't know. I like shoegazy kind of music, so soundscape stuff is stuff I'm used to listening to. And I don't know. For me, it doesn't detract from this album in any way.
Yeah. We have a song, We Hate Everyone. Again, this was another one that's basically a comment on what they were dealing with previously. If you listen to these lyrics, so they were basically singled out, be like, oh, you guys are Nazis, and you are like this, and you're this, and you hate these people. And they're like, we like, some of our band members are Jewish, like we are not Nazis, like that's ridiculous.
Yep.
So I mean, even lyrics is, it's like, I think it's like, it says rightist commies, leftist Nazis.
Yep.
And it's like, we don't care. It's like, we hate everyone,
Yep. They also respond to the whole Nazism stuff by having the song, kill all the white people.
Yep. It's pretty cool, like, to see that kind of transition to be like, where people are just taking this stuff so seriously.
Well, even watching the interviews with them, sometimes they really are, just tongue in cheek, but sometimes they're very serious when they say these things in songs.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that Peter Steele is very serious about. Like, he always talks about in interviews how has a very centrist view of the political system, of, science, religion, of, society, really.
Yeah.
Because he's like, you can't swing to either side without being crazy. Like, you really have to have a balanced perspective of the world.
Yeah. It's actually, if you want to look up some of his political views, they are very interesting. He is, I'll just say before you even go do it, he is very abrasive in his opinions.
Yep.
In the sort of like, if you're on, like, he's like, why should I support anyone on welfare? Like I have to go out and like this guy can watch cartoons. Like, why can't I do that? Like,
yep.
He doesn't.
He can be, very right wing sometimes, but he can be very left wing sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's a rock star. I mean, like, can he? Yeah. So
but that's what I love about him. He's so centrist. Like, his political ideas are not associated with a party. They're about his personal opinions.
Yeah.
And that's the way. I hate that we're talking about politics, but that is the way politics should be.
Okay, let's get off of politics. But
yeah.
So my favorite song on this album, and probably my favorite Type O Negative song of all time, is "Too Late Frozen." I love the sound of this song.
Yeah, That song is just so good. I have a hard time like choosing what my favorite song off this album is because I really, really love so many of these songs.
Yeah.
Granted that Christian Woman is a single, I think it's worthy of being considered one of the best songs of the album.
Yeah, I think one of the issues I ran into with this band, like this is, like I said, it's my favorite band of all time, is that I've heard Christian Woman so many times.
Yeah.
And even when I heard it initially, I just wasn't super into it. In fact, my favorite part of the song is the other half, like the acoustic part and then the Jesus Christ Looks Like Me part.
Yeah. But to me, that's all, I don't know. To me, that all adds to what it is. Like, I don't just consider the beginning of the song. Like,
I just never liked that whole first part. I mean, like, I go in total phases with that song.
Yeah.
Where I like it and then I don't like it. Whereas Black Number One, I like that song no matter what. Like,
yeah, I could see that. Black Number One's great, but yeah, Too Late Frozen is just so good.
Yeah. Oh, I love the, I think, who is it, of Herbs and Altars?
Yeah.
Did a video where she was talking about things not to do if you're a goth YouTuber or something like that. And she was like, don't do the crummy typo negative cover. So she does Black Number One because like so many people have done that. And like, oh my gosh, that's so me. Like, so.
It's actually easier for me to talk about which songs I like less on this album than it is for me to talk about what songs I like more. For me, I like that We Hate Everyone as a response to all this stuff that's come out, but like as far as song composition goes, it's kind of a boring song for me.
I mean, I don't know. It's so hard for me because, like I said, I love Type of Name so much. I don't find the songs boring.
I think I'm taking lyrics completely out of this.
Yeah, I know, but I think musically it's really good. A lot of people kind of tune out when it gets to the midsection.
That's kind of what happened.
Yeah, like the jun jun jun.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see why you would say that, but I still think it's really good.
I don't know. It's not one of the songs that really made an impact on me on the album.
Yeah.
Of course, I already mentioned that I don't really care for Summer Breeze, and I'm not the biggest fan of Bloody Kisses.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm surprised by that one. That's a good song.
Different strokes, man.
Yeah. I really like it. In fact, the thing I like a lot about this album is because they really did embrace like the sort of gothic romanticism sort of thing, they also embrace the sort of campiness of it. And that's what I really appreciate about this album because it still is like slightly humorous in like We Hate Everyone and things like that. And the sound isn't afraid to take from things like the Addams Family or like the Munsters or any of those kind of things, or the 70s kind of sound where you have like Set Me on Fire, totally influenced by 60s, 70s, and Can't Lose You with like the sitar kind of sound.
Yep.
I love that kind of stuff where they're just blending all together. One of my only complaints as a whole for this album is, and they had stated it in a lot of interviews and stuff, where they wish that they had more time to write and make this album, because think about it's 1 year. So it's Slowly Been Hard is 1991, Orders of Feces 92, and then Bloody Kisses was 93. And I can see that in this. In fact, you have a lot of parts where like it goes on for a while, so it just kind of feels like it just cuts immediately to a different thing. It's not really transition. And I think the biggest sufferer of this is the song Can't Lose You, because the only lyric in the song is "'Cause I can't lose you" for the entirety of the song.
Yeah, I will say it doesn't bother me as much because there was a lot of sonically interesting things going on in that song. Yeah, that like kept my interest. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, for me, like lyrics never caught my immediate attention as much as song composition did. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that song is more enjoyable than it is for you.
Okay. I also think Set Me on Fire could have better lyrics. I think one of the songs that I really like, I don't know if many people comment on it, is Blood and Fire.
Blood and Fire is good.
I like that song a lot.
Yeah.
I really do. Like I said, so my basic opinion on Bloody Kiss is going to be the soundscape stuff. It's okay. Like, it's not my favorite thing. It never really is my favorite thing on most albums. It does feel a little rushed in some ways. Like, especially because I've listened to it so many times. Like, I just pick up on things. I'm just like, okay, like, this song has this many lyrics and this many verses, whereas this song is just repeating again and again. Yeah. I do like the new sound that they had on here. Yep. And the kind of dynamic kind of thing that they had going on. So for me, it is kind of like a flawed album. I don't think it's perfect.
No, of course not. But it's very hard to make a perfect album.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely the most popular album by far.
Yeah.
And the most referenced, and it's definitely where the typo negative sound comes from.
And I think there's good reason for that.
Yeah. So it's Bloody Kisses.
Yep.
Okay, we're getting to my favorite album, might be of all time. So you're not really going to hear much criticism from me on this one. This is October Rust.
It's definitely my favorite of this 4. I think for me, so they have this new sound that they've explored with the last album. Yeah. And they don't exactly continue in it, not directly. They like a lot of staples stay with them. The gothic, very romantic staples kind of continue onto this album. But one thing that's a major difference between this album and the last album is that there's a lot more use of major keys in their songwriting.
Oh, man, I don't even know how to describe this album. It's so hard. This is like one of my favorite childhood albums. This is one of my favorite albums when I was a teenager, like growing up. This album is definitely a step towards a more like warmer sound, and like you said, because of major keys and everything like that. And they kind of trimmed the fat on a lot of the kind of chugging areas, like even from We Hate Everyone, or if you listen to like Darrow Too Much, where it has these like kind of chugging parts, and then you have a sort of fast melodic part for a little bit, and then going back to that.
They do a much better job of integration. If a song changes parts, they do so in a way that sonically makes sense and rhythmically, instead of just kind of just cutting like they would do in a lot of their earlier releases. And so for me, like composition wise, this album is really where they get their shit together.
I totally agree with that, because nothing on this album is droning.
No, not at all. I've been listening to this album like just on repeat since we were doing this episode.
Yeah. I've been listening to this repeat since I was like 13. So really the only comedic thing that you have on this album is the intro, where the intro is like dead air.
Yeah.
And then there's like, hey.
Like, hey, I hope you enjoyed this joke.
Yeah, this is Peter,
We're going to play you our album now.
Yeah. But then you have these great, fantastic songs. Like, I mean, pretty much everything. I don't even know.
Everything is composed so beautifully.
Yeah, so the single that most people are familiar with off this one is Love You to Death.
Yep.
And I adore this song. There was probably a time when I listened to it so much I was sick of it, but then I just go back to enjoying it right away. And so, like, just the whole beginning part of this album, so Love You to Death, Be My Judas and Green Man, what a great way to start off an album.
No, those are like, are like syncing on brains right now. It's like never happened before, so it's like...
Yeah, They're not yelling at each other about something.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
Those 3 songs are like the greatest intro for them. Like,
I totally agree. Redwater, Christmas Morning, still good.
Yeah.
Not my favorite, especially because it comes off of a really, really strong Green Man. And then My Girlfriend's Girlfriend.
The single.
I don't really like this song, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think that there are better songs that could have been the single for this album, but everybody thinks...
They agree with that too, yeah. In fact, they said that was one of the reasons that the album didn't do very well. Because that was... I mean, it still did well.
It did. It actually... I think it might... So their last album, I know, was a better international success. I can't remember. Don't quote me on this. I think that this might have been a bigger success in the U.S. than Bloody Kisses was.
I don't think so. I mean, Bloody Kisses went platinum, this one went gold. Yeah, I know, like, all this stupid stuff.
I just remember something about, like, there was something about this album doing something that the last one didn't. I can't remember. And it was definitely U.S. related.
I don't know. But then Die With Me, I love Die With Me. That's probably, like... It's so hard for me to pick a favorite on something because I feel so strongly about all of these ones, but even Burnt Flowers Fallen and Praise of Bacchus.
I like the Cinnamon Girl cover, to be honest with you. Like,
I like it better than the original one. I'll say that. And then, of course, closing out the album, of course, the glorious liberation of the People's Tectonic Republic of Vinland by the combined forces of the United Territories of Europa. I had to say all that, which is 1 minute and 7 seconds long.
I've always appreciated when bands like have these ridiculous song titles, and Typo Negative does it so well.
Yeah, it's just another soundscape one, just kind of like marching and everything. Yep. And then Wolf Moon and Haunted. Wolf Moon, such an amazing song, and it's so weird because, like I said, this was the first Typo Negative album I had. This was really the first thing that exposed me to this band.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like the song Wolf Moon that much when I first heard it. I was kind of like, like this is like it's hard to be My Druidess and Green Man in the beginning of this album, and especially Love You to Death. It was one of those things where you know how when you're a teenager you're like, oh, I identify with these songs, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of like, I don't really listen to this stuff. And then like you kind of stick it out and you come back later and you're like, listen to a few more songs. You're like, oh, why didn't I listen to this song more, right? This was this album where I just kept discovering more and more songs, and the more time goes on, the more I just start to love more on it. And Wolf Moon is one of my favorite songs now, whereas I didn't really like it before. Yeah. But I think it's just great. I mean...
Yeah, I think that, I agree with you that perhaps My Girlfriend's Girlfriend is not the best song in the album, and, Red Water, it's hard to come to that from Green Man. Yeah. But there's never a point in this album where I really feel like skipping a song, to be honest with you.
Yeah. That's actually to be said for My Girlfriend's Girlfriend, too. Yeah. Is because these songs are very heart-wrenching and very... serious, and at least more so than their other material. When it gets to My Girlfriend's Girlfriend, it's actually a pretty good break because it's a pretty long, like it's pretty much exactly halfway through the album where that comes in, and it's probably about where it should be. Yeah. And then the rest of the album is again very long and very serious, whereas My Girlfriend's Girlfriend is pretty much the only thing on here that's under 4 minutes.
And also kind of a tongue-in-cheek song a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I just really think that this is, without a doubt, the perfect blend of the typo negative sound.
Oh, I completely agree with you on that.
I know a lot of people will disagree with that because
Blake just gets so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
As far as mixing musically, as far as lushness to
composition, to like everything,
it just feels so right. And I can honestly say that I've never heard an album that has ever sounded like this so naturally. Yeah. And it does not feel forced in any way. And that's one of the things actually I kind of don't like about My Girlfriend's Girlfriend is it does feel kind of forced to me. Yeah. But you see, pretty much everything doesn't apply to My Girlfriend's Girlfriend. That's basically what I'm trying to get at with this. But it doesn't feel forced to me at all. Like Love You to Death and Be My Druidess,
I think Be My Druidess is like my personal favorite from the album. Yeah. Like, I really like that song.
I remember I had this girlfriend in high school, and I was obviously way into Type of Negative is like my favorite band. So I gave her a copy of it. I just like, I think I didn't even make out. I think I like loan her my CD or something. Yep. And she's like, oh, your CD scratched. I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, oh, the intro to Be My Druidess, it skips. Because when it starts with this like it skipped like the
I was like fake skipping.
I was like, oh no, that's the way it's supposed to be. I thought it was funny because she didn't quite get like the intro was supposed to be dead air, and then Be My Druidess has like a fake skipping in the beginning and it cuts out. But yeah, the sound on here is just so amazing, and it's one of the few albums where if I'm really feeling down and I just listen to it, like say I'm just put on some headphones and zone out. It's one of the only albums that I can honestly say can make me cry. Yeah. And that is a very weird thing to say because I know that a lot of people don't feel that this band is maybe worth their time as much as, say, like The Cure or, I don't know, like a lot of other bands, right? Or even something like Him, right? So Him's the band, the love metal band, is a band that takes a lot of influence from Type O Negative. Yeah. I think they have a very big fan base, and they largely credited, a lot of their influence and stuff to Peter Steele and to the sound of Type O Negative and that kind of like big sound they get. Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people who are big fans of Him say like, oh, these are the only albums that make me cry, right? Yeah. And I feel like Type O Negative, because there is such like a sense of humor or kind of tongue-in-cheek thing to it, a lot of people don't take most of their songs seriously. With this album, this was really done as like a really serious album, and for the most part
it is very serious, and I don't really take this album lightheartedly at all.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are, of course,
it has moments.
Yeah, it definitely does. Like I think it was during Wolf Moon, like the 28th day, She'll Be Bleeding Again. Yeah. Like of course the period. Yeah. The like what they call it, the Rusty Landslide. Like so there are these things, but it's so well integrated into the music, and it's done with a much more romantic tinge and a much more like deep kind of thing to it. And I know Peter Steele for years was always trying to downplay this album, right? Yep. So when it was released, he was like, people were saying, oh, it seems like this album's a little bit softer than Bloody Kisses, and and like So Deep and Hard, and he's like, oh, like it's not, it's just that we're doing more major keys. Yep. everything like that. Even later, he was asked about, what are your favorite albums and stuff, and he's like, he would usually say something like, well, Bloody Kisses sold the most, and like all the albums suck, but this is the one that I think's the best,
Yeah.
But this really felt like it was an attempt to take his music very seriously, take the Type O Negative sound very seriously, and I think it has pretty much the perfect blend of amount of instruments, if that makes sense, because as we're gonna see with when we do Type O Negative Part 2, with World Coming Down and Life Is Killing Me and Dead Again, is I felt that like later some of the songs don't integrate to keyboards that well, or they don't integrate the guitar as well, or instruments just drop out, right?
Yeah.
And with this one, you get a really, really full sound from every instrument, and I feel like the composition was really, really thought out on this one.
Definitely.
And I love it. It's totally its own unique thing.
It really is. And Peter Steele always talks about how this album is just as dark as an album as the rest of the albums, and that people just mistake that because the major keys or whatever. And I think what a lot of people miss is that I don't think he's trying to say that like this album is as heavy or is like vicious. It's just or is vicious. He's trying to say that this album it's just as true to his emotion and just as serious. And there's nothing happy about this album.
Oh no, definitely.
And people continually asked him like, "Oh, are you guys in a happier place because this album sounds more melodic?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, we're not in a happier place. I'm not in a happier place." Like, listen to the lyrics.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. So I don't know if we'll ever do another album on here where it's probably my favorite album ever, but October Rust, if I had to pick an album to, like, somebody put a gun to my head again and ask me to choose another album again. Not that it happens every day. But if I had that kind of situation where it was like, okay, truly tell me what your favorite album is, right? It's probably October Rust. And I just really connected with this album, and I still do today. I connected with it in the same way I did when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And in a different way, which is weird because, you just experience some more. You have more love in your life. You've experienced more loss. You've probably had, the older you get, more people die.
Yeah. Well, when you're a teenager, you hear these lyrics and you just kind of take them at face value.
Exactly.
You grow up and you have some of the harshness of reality. And you can relate.
So this album definitely means something to me, and I'm constantly always learning something about it, or I'm kind of relating it to a new part of my life, and that's a sign of a great album. That's why I think one of the issues with like all the emo music and stuff is I mean, not that we're gonna bash on any of that stuff, but I just wanted to like say, like, because that stuff, it seems like people are like getting nostalgic about it. Like, it's been long enough where people are getting nostalgic about like emo music.
That and like anything 90s really.
Yeah. So, but a lot of that stuff, it just doesn't have a holding power. They're like, oh, this really speaks to me when I was a teenager, right? Yeah. And or like some songs.
Well, that's how I get about bands like Bowling for Soup or something. You know, like if I hear that, I'm like, oh, I remember when I was 13. Like
exactly something like that. And for me, this album meant a lot to me when I was a teenager. It meant a lot to me when I first moved out of my parents' house, when I first living on my own. It means a lot to me now. I lived on my own and I'm an adult.
Yeah.
And it's it's just crazy that album can mean that much to me.
Yeah, that is the sign of a good album. Yeah. And aside from like its personal emotional depth, I think another sign of its greatness is the fact that it's composed so well that I never feel like skipping songs when I'm listening to it.
Definitely.
Sonically, it's just pleasing to my ears.
Yeah. So that's October Rust, and that has been our Type O Negative Part 1.
Yep.
So yeah, obviously a lot of love for this band, and I was waiting to do this one until we kind of for a special occasion. Yeah. So 11 episodes in, kind of wanted to make sure we had the flow going for it. And
it's a good time to do this episode.
Exactly.
I have to say the only thing that I wish was different, and I would never truly wish this on Type O Negative because I love their greenness. It's really more a wish about myself. Yeah. But I can't wear green. I look horrible in it. So I can't buy Type O Negative shirt. Like I probably will anyways.
Yeah. I used to have a Life Is Killing Me t-shirt.
Yeah.
So yeah, their color scheme is very bright.
Yeah.
Well, it's like especially during the last tour, it was like neon green.
Oh yeah.
It was less
It was less the dark,
yeah,
foresty.
The Vinland green.
Yep.
Yeah. So before we head off, we're going to plug our social media and everything. And, of course...
Yeah. So do the weekly rounds.
Yep.
So those of you who don't know, and for those of you who do, we have an Instagram. It's called GothCast. Very simple to find. We have a Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's called GothCast.
Yep.
We have a YouTube channel called GothCast Video. There's space in there, by the way, between the cast and the video. And we also have a Gmail account, gothcastradio@gmail.com, which you can feel free to send us questions or feel free to contact us on any social medium. But perhaps most importantly, we have a website, gothcastradio.com. No www, just gothcastradio.com. That's where you can find all of our content, videos, fashion blogs, the podcast episodes, news updates, things like that. And we are also on iTunes. For those of you who love your Apple products, please feel free to subscribe. And it'd be nice to get a review.
Yep.
So it's pretty much been GothCast.
Okay. And I'm Dr. Sanders.
And I'm Robbie Gore.
All right. Stay spooky.